Today, we talked to 31-year-old Dorian, who's been saving up for this home purchase for quite some time. He had a good stash of cash put away, and he decided he didn't want to settle with this home purchase. Thanks to his preparation, he was able to get a great deal in the buyer winter window of opportunity that I reported about earlier this year. His unicorn team helped him with his offer and his counter offer. That was where the magic really happened. And he ended up being the winning bid with creative terms and strong negotiations to not just win the home, but also to structure a deal that was best for him. And you'll hear how he found out that his unicorn, while being experienced and knowledgeable and incredibly helpful and educational with him, those were all great. But the best trait from his unicorn was their patience, because Dorian was asking a ton of questions throughout the process. Let's hear this story.
How to Buy a Home educates, protects, and connects first-time home buyers to qualified vetted realtors in their area. Whether you're looking for DIY information or step-by-step guidance, How to Buy a Home is the #1 resource for first-time home buyers.
Hey, everybody. I'm super excited. I got another interview session today. This is Dorian, and we've been chatting for, I don't know, like an hour and a half before we turned on the mics because he comes from the old world that I came from. And I got to tell you, when you're a showbiz person and you're a creative and that's what you do, nobody tells you should start thinking about buying a house. But this dude's had it on his brain for a while. Dorian, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here. It's definitely, hoping to help some people with some insight. I know I gained a lot listening to this and really kind of started from scratch. So hoping to help how I can.
That's awesome. Give us your biggest tip for people who are just trying to figure this whole thing out.
Yeah. So for me, my first tip, honestly, is like people are already doing, listening to the podcast. And from there, really just because of the way my brain works, it was starting to figure out that budget and figuring out the flexibility of where you can shift, where you want to, really put your effort of putting your money in the right place and stuff. Once you know kind of your numbers and obviously how you could work with them, I think in having, that kind of great team, you can really gives you some options and flexibility.
That's it. It's so great because I was looking at your numbers. Now that we had a chance to talk, it all makes sense to me now. But are you still 31 years old or?
Yep, I am 31, and I have actually just bought my first house. So I've been a renter in all of this, and kind of been waiting. Where a lot of people will buy their first house and then kind of build the equity and all of that. I went a slightly different plan, and I said, okay, let me find some places that were a little cheaper renting for a bit. Obviously, I was always kind of one of those like, hey, why would I spend all this money locking in on a place? Obviously, since hearing the podcast, there's the whole rent replacement strategy idea that it's like, yeah, maybe I could have bought some equity and save myself later. But I made a point to kind of save so that ultimately when I bought my first house, it would be the house that, really happy with.
That was kind of cool. I was going back and I was looking at your numbers and, the rent replacement strategy really, for most people, it's, hey, get in there with a low down payment, 3%, 5%. But you were in an industry where you were making money. And the fact that you said your personality, you must be budget conscious because you had a nice big chunk of change. When did that mind shift happen when you went from, okay, I want to buy the last house, not the first house. And I'm cool if my rent goes up, $2,400 a month, that's the numbers I had. That was a big decision. When did you figure out like, I'm cool if my rent goes up this much because I'm getting that forever house?
Right. And to that point, I'll kind of slightly jump ahead and say, luckily it's not 2,400 or however much now, because as we go through the process, we'll talk through that. But good. Kind of as we were going through again, listening to the podcast and just getting to the point, I think financially where it's like, hey, yes, I'm going to spend some more money, but obviously the equity that I'm going to get out of it, especially, as I'm moving into kind of the next phase of thinking of my bigger financial picture where it's, having that liquidity, but then, there's obviously the stock element of investing in bonds and all this. So now the equity part of it and home ownership, call it a little bit of maturing and just, being ready. Part of it's also just the personality of like, hey, ready to kind of settle down versus, seeing where kind of I'm in the greater Orlando area where I wanted to live and all that. And I know we talked about just other, traveling and living in other states and stuff like that. So kind of all aligned in that sense. But yeah, I would say kind of having the equity, and it's also the peace of mind of, hey, you're not spending money on, oh, I got to go move to this place or X, Y, and Z, and you get to build the house that you kind of want, or, renovate and long-term design it in that sense, make it your own.
Yeah, control is a big factor. It's very funny to me how many people will be like, I just want to buy a house because my landlord won't let me change anything. And I'm like, cool. Here's all this math I spent 20 years developing. And they're like, I don't care.
No, but and that's where I go back to the point of, honestly, in our case, we kind of had numbers of, hey, here's where we could go. And, of course, we wanted to find the ultimate unicorn house where it's 100% exactly what we want. But as we were going through the process with our realtor, who we got, from your suggestion, we started to realize, okay, we could get probably 80-90% of the way there, but then there's some things that we just want to update. So now, because we ran the numbers, we know, okay, this is how much house we can afford relative to what changes we might want to make to make it feel like our own in that sense.
Well, your unicorn realtor showed you that it's not feasible to buy a unicorn house, but then you ended up getting a thoroughbred. How's that?
There you go. I love it. That's great.
Told you I could speak in sound bites, bro. Okay. So you came into this with a good chunk of money. You were willing to have your rent increase. Mm-hmm. Where did you pick a price point? How did you guys do that? Did you say, we want these homes, let us know what the price of that monthly payment's going to be, and then we'll figure out what we want to take away, like you said?
Right. So I would say, honestly, this started in, we're in 2026, we're recording this in May. This started in January. I actually was I literally Googled first-time home buying podcasts and stuff. And of course, I had kind of toyed with this in the past and stuff, just the idea of starting to learn. But again, because of my personality and, it's the biggest financial thing that you kind of spend. And so, everything about the podcast resonated once I connected of like, you build this team around you who they're going to be experts, and ultimately you give your opinion and where you want to spend your money and all of this, what makes sense. But like, it really just resonated, understanding, but also the acknowledging, I'm not going to know everything. It's kind of the idea of like, enough to be dangerous and ask the questions. And I know Tara could speak to the fact that I asked a million and stuff. And she was always great to, get back to me and, add that insight of like, okay, this is what you definitely need to worry about. Here's the things where, no, you don't. It's going to be fine. And stuff like that. So again, it was kind of like at first learning, hearing about the podcast. I also, my original apartment, the lease was going to be up in September. So I was like, interest rates at that moment, they were okay, but let me just start this process in my mind, just like you always say, people say, a year and a half this, and it ended up being 3 months later, I was under contract. So
yeah, you started in January, you reached out to me February 4th, and you closed April 10th.
Yep, exactly. And we went under contract, I think, March 4th. So exactly that. My plan was, and I even told Tara on our first call of, hey, I'm really going to take the time in all of this. Like if we find something, the unicorn house, great, let's do it. Like I'm prepared. If not, we have this time, especially I was thinking, this is kind of the springtime, probably in the summer, more people are moving. So there's more, options in the housing. And then a war started and interest rates started skyrocketing the day I started to lock rates, which that's a whole story in itself, which really drove things.
So, wow, that's a lot. I will get to that because that is an interesting thing. I just recorded a podcast, or actually, I think it just released the day I'm recording this with you, about how interest rates go up fast and go down slow. So they went down slow to 5.99. Then the war started and they shot up. Did you end up locking into like the higher 6.3 range?
I ultimately, at the end of the day, and then ended up being a 5.625. Because it was, which all things considered, I was incredibly happy with. So that there was some points buy down via a lender credit that basically I traded off instead of the lender credit I did to get the points lower. I actually started a bit of a bidding war between two mortgage brokers inadvertently, which was a whole thing. Which worked out again. One was a friend, and then there was another guy in town who was well recommended, and I was going to go with him. And I called my friend to say, "Hey, I'm going to go with this other guy," and he refused to lose the deal. And ultimately, as the consumer, I won by getting really low mortgage broker rates, and then I got the 5.625 rate and all that. But no, that day it ended up that day at 5.99. I think earlier in the day rates were at 5.75, and they were literally calling me because each hour or two the rates were going up. And this was literally like, I think March 6th or something like that. Yep. I was just rate shopping, and they were saying it's going up. So I thank God got it locked, because I think by the next day or two it was at like 6.1 or something, and it just kept on going. So that also helped motivate, okay, time to make this decision and we got to go.
Okay. So you jumped in, you were willing to go with the higher mortgage payment that was going to be higher than your rent payment. Mm-hmm. And then you and Tara talked about the unicorn house versus the compromise flexible house, and figuring out Tara does the triangle of success, which is my favorite thing. Considering that you guys were, looking at homes in the $600,000-$700,000 price range, did you guys immediately start at that point and go, okay, this is it. This is going to be more of a long-term home?
So generally, yes, we were thinking long-term home. I think we did go down to as low as 550. I definitely was a bit of the camp of where our apartment was. We really liked the area a lot. So I was begrudgingly really wanting to find houses right there. And there were a couple, some were lower in our price range, some were higher. And as time progressed, we realized, hey, for what we want in a house, this area, because it's nice, they had a lot of 2-story homes, and we're just a couple. And so we really only needed 3-4 bedrooms, and they just didn't have a lot of space for like a dog and potentially a pool. We just kind of needed to expand a little more. So we looked in different parts of Orlando, figuring out really what we liked the most. So we said, okay, this range, while I obviously did not want to really have a $700,000 payment, again, if it was gonna kind of like, hey, there's nothing else we need to do, everything's great, no painting, no floors change, like that could have been an option. But really we wanted to hit somewhere in the 625, 650 range. And again, part of that was doing the math of what is the amount that I'm comfortable taking home and putting towards payment? What are the other, between credit cards and all of that, are different debts. Luckily, all of my school had already been paid in that sense. My car had been paid. So I was very financially, I would say a little unicorn in that sense. So I had, but again, because I've been 31 and I'd been working towards this, that was kind of always the plan. It was getting enough down payment to be able to have the flexibility to do whatever. I mean, I did entertain the idea of doing a 10 or 15% down, going back to the whole PMI as a privilege idea in that sense. So, we ran those numbers and entertained different things. And luckily, again, we just had the flexibility to kind of see where we wanted things to net out.
Yeah, because you had a nice chunk of change. So you had more than 20% if you wanted to use it. It sounds like that's the decision you decided to go.
Yes. Ultimately, I love
that you thought about it. I love that you thought about it. But again, so for those of you who are in a position where you have 20% down, I'm not saying it's the best thing for everybody to do at 10% or 5%. But, Dorian, I can understand. You said, first thing I asked you, biggest tip, know your numbers. Sounds like you've already been doing this for years. By the way, 31, you're still 9 years ahead of the average, bro. So all the time that you took to get ready, I can't explain it any louder. The more you prepare before you start looking at houses, the easier the process is.
Right.
And I'm stoked that you got to listen to my goofiness on the podcast over and over again and look at that option. So then once you guys figured out you could still do the larger down payment, did you end up shifting to different neighborhoods so you get more of the house that you wanted?
Yeah. So kind of what we started to find is we're basically more in the West Orlando area, which keeps on kind of developing more and more. Is we were finding ultimately basically where we netted out is we now have a house in a neighborhood that was built in 2020 that at the time was kind of in the middle of nowhere. There has been things that have started to develop around it. And what we actually started to find was that this neighborhood, a lot of people were selling because they bought houses in the 350 to 400K range. And now we're selling it in the 600, 650, 700. So they're making their profit. But again, they're 2020 houses. They're nice. And all of this. So we kind of started having a little bit of that trade-off of, okay, the exact location we wanted rather than the house that ultimately is going to be better. And in this case, the area is even developing further. So there was a lot of Googling of, what are the future plans in terms of how close gas stations or this and that are going to be. So that kind of what we wanted in a location, today we know is going to be there in the next 5 to 10 years in that sense.
It's an interesting piece. I do have a lot of people. I mean, I do it all the time for neighborhoods that I'm looking at. But when you're going outskirts, understanding where the developments are happening, how things are selling, city planning. And I'm sure I've worked with so many people in your industry, and you guys are Google machines, research crazies.
Yes. No, that is, I will say, I ended up subscribing to ChatGPT Plus, and through everything its way, I had basically my girlfriend Tara and ChatGPT as my holy trinity of asking expertise and finding out research. And again, it's, on whatever side of AI you stand on, I was using it more on the search tool element of, hey, it can check these things and honestly check a lot of documents very quickly and stuff. And at the end of the day, I still got to make my own decisions. But honestly, it was an incredibly helpful tool, even going kind of down the line of when we got the contract and stuff. And okay, throw it in there. And, hey, there's a lot of legal jargon. Obviously, I could talk to Tara, but, let me also just kind of understand, put this in simple words and stuff like that. I think, at the end of the day, there are a lot of these tools that, especially as a first-time home buyer, it empowered me a lot to research and just understand these things so that then I could have informed decisions. Then maybe someone, hell, even 5 years ago would kind of just be fully on the receiving end of, just getting information.
I love the fact that, you talked about, you're a person who has knowledge where, it's just enough to be dangerous. But once you started talking to Tara, what were, some of the things that using a local unicorn expert brought to the table for you?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing off the gate is, and again, I think this is directly from your podcast, is the first time I talked to her, because, I didn't know who she was, and I Googled, obviously she had reviews and stuff and everything was great, but I didn't know her. So I said, all right, let's just litmus test. Tell me the process from right now, this conversation, to after we close, or I moved into the house. And she spent probably 30, 40 minutes in a way that I totally could understand in detail with no contract or obligation or anything, telling me the entire process. And I literally walked away, told my girlfriend, I said, yeah, it's going to be Tara. Like, we could communicate in that sense. There was no intimidation. I still, even though I would never see it this way, like I felt like a client, though kind of more friends, but, she was working for me, but with me in that sense. Because, everyone and their mother has a friend who's a realtor. And I kind of wanted to make the point that I honestly went in saying, I want someone who I can fire if I don't like them through all of this, versus, the family friend who then doesn't, like you talked about, like, oh, this person just randomly became a realtor or something. And all of a sudden they're making the most important financial decision. And when you said that, I know a lot of people who that's the case. It kind of clicked. And so, yeah, honestly, getting connected through you and then just talking to her, I felt reassured that, like, yeah, we're going to be able to knock this out. And we definitely had some curveballs that, obviously Tara handled all of them, but some interesting things through this whole process between appraisals and inspections, and just like process things through the home buying process.
Okay, we did the interest rate curveball. What was the appraisal curveball? Did you underappraise?
Yes. So ultimately, the house, everything about this house has been going through is so interesting. So the house was listed at $649. The other thing that was even funnier, so there was a house in the neighborhood, like I mentioned, there was a lot of selling going on that we had looked at 2 days before. And it was on the higher end of our price point. We liked it, but I was like, it didn't have enough of a backyard, had a view into other people's houses. So we were like, we like it, but we were toying. And then, I'm going through Zillow and I see, oh, there's a house, because at that point you're so deep into it, you're getting the notifications. Oh, there's a house like 5 down from it that's for sale. Oh, wait, it has a price point of $649K. And oh, it has a pool. We're like, oh, I text Tara instantly. Hey, we need to see this. And I'm not kidding you. It had been on Zillow probably 6 hours. And she said, there's already an offer on it. We can go see it tomorrow morning. Can you guys make yourself available at 7 a.m.? And so we said, all right, let's go. And again, this is right before interest rates. And, the market hasn't been crazy hot in all of this. And so she said that it was called, aggressive pricing or something like that, where it's kind of underpriced just to drive price up.
Okay, you'll understand this. Drop-down arrows. That's how I price everything, based on drop-down arrows. You're getting notifications. You have a cap. If that home is worth $680, I'm going to recommend to my seller to list it as $649, because somebody set their price for their automatic searches based on the drop-down arrow, which is at $50,000 increments. So it's listed absolutely set at 649. The person who wrote the offer had a good realtor who knew it was aggressively priced and knew it was going to sell more for that. And you had a good realtor. So that's why there were two of you in there in 6 hours.
Yeah. So they had some offers. We said, okay, we saw it at 7 a.m. And we felt good about it. We're like, yeah, there's a lot of bones to this where, again, like it was a pool, which later we ended up finding out was built a year before. So now we have a pool that's only a year old,
wow.
Which I'll fast forward to. Again, the neighborhood was nice and all of this. The house we knew was a 2020. There were little things we wanted to renovate. So we said, let's, at Tara's suggestion, we did an escalation clause. So we said, okay, let's put in at 660, I think, and we would go up either like 2.5K or 5K up to 670. And then she gave like, hey, we need to know in 24 hours. And long story short, what ended up happening was because I had the 20%, because I had the pre-authorization and the lender had called to refer me on Tara's behalf, even though the other offer had an escalation clause up to 660, we were the stronger offer and ended up winning it. So at that time, our sale price was going to be 660 with 20% down on a 30-year conventional. Fast forwarding, going to the appraisal, ultimately it ended up appraising 25K less. So it was 635. So at one point I'm sitting there, kind of figuring out, okay, so what does this actually really mean? And with all that, we also found out that the sellers actually had to move because of a job. Because of my operating, I said, oh, so I have leverage because now I kind of have them in my hands. They need to move. Sure, they can go and find another buyer if they really want and lose all this time. So actually, we went and said, hey, the appraisal came in at 635. And of course, the realtor said, oh, well, will Dorian cover the full cost? Or maybe he wants to go half, but even half actually would have been over the original listing price. So I did the numbers and I said, okay, what was my original cash to close? Now that it appraised lower, I hadn't realized this, just I hadn't thought about it, but my monthly mortgage by default was going to be lower because obviously the bank literally won't let me have as big of a load. Where I think before it was going to be somewhere around like $3,900 all in between HOA, all that. It was going to be 39. It was going to end up somewhere around 3,500, 3,600 a month. So I'm thinking, okay, I have about $300, $400 more a month I could play with. And then I said, okay, what was my original cash to close? I'm not willing to go beyond that. So I will maybe meet them up until that number, which was basically 7K of the 25K gap. We kind of countered and said, hey, we'll cover 7K. So basically the way I'm seeing it is I get the same house. I get it now for $300 to $400 cheaper a month, but my cash to close is what I've already emotionally, financially prepared to pay for. And of course they said, oh, I don't know. And my personality, I will say, because like I said, location was really big. There was another house that at the exact same time was very interesting. So again, I gave Tara a heart attack and I said, hey, can we just go look at some other house real quick so I can feel better about maybe this other one? And we went there and ultimately we walked away saying, we feel better about this one. 2 days had passed where I know Tara was getting her phone blown up by the realtor saying, what's going on? What's going on? And ultimately we said, we're still interested in the house, but again, we'll bring 7K. And at that point, the seller said, fine, we'll meet you. So ultimately, I walked away with the house that we wanted at $642,000 and originally listed at $649,000. Like I said, my mortgage dropped $300 to $400 a month, and I still had the exact same cash to close that originally we put the offer in and I was prepared for.
Okay, if you are a spreadsheet person,
which I had a whole spreadsheet going.
Go back and rewind and listen to that so you can understand that I'm telling you, there are so many pieces of this that trying to do this on your own to get other information from other people, you think that you're probably a million times better at spreadsheets than I am, but your realtors have been through appraisal, inspection. There's so many different variables that you can do it. And if you are not a spreadsheet person, I can tell you that everything that Dorian said is stuff that you and your team can understand. But here's the big takeaway. Never worry about overbidding on a home when you have a good real estate team because the appraisal is your protection. You can bail at any time. What happened to Dorian was he got in a bidding war and people overbid because everyone was excited and trying to get the house. But because he had the right team with him, you're never going to overpay for a home because your lender won't let you. They send an appraiser out there and they go, hey, you can have this house, but we're not lending you the full money. So you got to come up with another $25,000. And you can say no and leave the deal without having any problems.
Right.
That kind of stuff, dude, we do all the time. And it's my favorite. It's my favorite part of the job to find outcomes when it looks like there's no outcome. Normally, you appraise low 20, 30,000, game over. Everybody's pissed. There's different motivation at different times.
Right. No, and exactly to your point of the team. The first thing I did, first, obviously I called Tara. And then right after that, I called the lender and actually I had them run the worksheets. I said, okay, give me three or four situations. One where, what is my cash to close? Just so we all see the numbers of if I pay the full gap. What if I pay half? What if I keep my cash to close the same? And then what if I just say, no, I'm not doing anything? And to that point, I had my team do the numbers and all I was doing was reacting and then having that conversation. And of course, it's always the first call to your realtor to say, hey, how do you feel about this? What are the tactics that we can do to use this? Are we on the defense or offense now in that sense? Yeah. And having them kind of be a little bit of your shield to that sense. I know there was a lot of conversations through this whole process that Tara would have that I know I was shielded from on things. That's why they're there.
Yeah. Number one, I don't tell you how the sausage gets made. Number two, we have no shame. Throw all the crap on me and let me play the bad guy. And let me tell you, hey, you know what? I'm going to turn you into the bad guy right now and let's see what they say. Sometimes we have to play nice with the other realtor the whole time. And I've had the sweetest people in the background. I go, just so you know, I'm making you sound like a real jerk. But when I need to make you sound nice, then, we're going to be able to do that. And the process of when you're ultimately everyone's just understanding the win-win, these people had to go. They knew because of your terms and because of the team you had behind you. And, I loved it. Like you said, your lender called right behind your offer. That is a huge tip, everybody. So especially because you were rate shopping, but you obviously must have been checking their service level as well. Because a lot of times when you rate shop, that's not the kind of person that's going to call behind. So
right. No, 100%. I made a point to say, let's test the waters. Who's going to work with and for me in that sense,
Nice.
So,
and for me. I like that very much. Okay. I know you found my podcast, beginning of this year, and I know you didn't think so. How does it feel to move this quickly? Because, dude, you've been thinking about this for 10 years and you did this in 3 months.
Right. No, it is funny. Honestly, it was to the point where I called my mom and they kind of knew. And it was just like, oh, yeah, by the way, we're on contract at a house. And I was like, wait, what? Weren't you just starting this the other day in that sense? And again, I think it's a bit of, it's everyone's comfort level and stuff. We knew my plan was always like, okay, I want to have, like we talked about, the finances in line so I could be flexible, whether it's going to take 9 months, because, if in all honesty, if we didn't find the right house and the interest rates were too high and stuff, we would have still been waiting and still listening to the podcast and still figuring this out. It was, just everything kind of worked out in that sense. And sure, obviously to break my lease, to move into the house, there was penalty. But in that, I literally took, here's how much money I currently have. Here's how much I want to save. So here's how much I'm willing to play with between just move out costs, breaking a lease, down payment, any renovations we wanted to do the house. Again, and I understand not everyone is this, into the numbers and stuff. It's just based on my background and my career. But that's how I feel confident in making informed decisions. And, even if you aren't able to do everything now, we had a window where there was 20 days between when we closed on this house into when our lease was going to break, that we were able to get a lot of stuff done. Obviously, a lot of people would say, hey, I'm going to spread this out over a year, 5 years, 10 years. And everything is fine. It's really just what is your comfort and what are you prepared to do in that sense. And ultimately, I'm always a fan of, just like this podcast does, dive as deep or not as you want to into the knowledge well. And then when you're ready, bring the team on to support and all that. So not one person obviously can do this whole thing, despite, Tara might be like, hey, Dorian, you tried to a few times.
Yes, I can feel that. But I have to tell you, for me, I want everyone to understand as many of the numbers as they can. The problem that I have seen over 20 years of helping people is if that's not their thing, they get analysis paralysis and then they just wait. And they're hoping that some magic interest rate or price drop is going to be the thing. The fact that a numbers runner like you came to the decision that like, oh, this makes sense in 2026 with the interest rates where they are, prices and the war, that's like, okay, I don't need any more validation than that. Like the fact that you are like, this still makes sense. I'm going to pay, $1,800 more than my rent because this makes sense even now. That's a wonderful thing. And I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story. This is really good stuff. And I hope that everybody understands that the more you do your numbers, the better. And if you are the kind of person that's like Dorian and wants to go nuts, go for it. Or you can reach out and get your team and you can start doing it together and people will hold your hand the whole way. So I appreciate your time, dude. Thanks for coming on.
No, thanks. Again, hopefully, I know I actually have some friends here now listening to the podcast as well that I've referred to who are kind of in a similar boat. So hopefully someone takes something away from this, even if it's a little chunk that will help them.
Hey, I told you, I've got that circle of people in your world of production and development in LA. Now maybe we can get the Orlando group and get them to understand how to do these things. So thanks again. I appreciate having you, buddy.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Fantastic. And once again, I would like to thank Dorian for coming on the show. Great insights, great information. And I think that we can all learn a lot from Dorian's story so that you can move forward and you can feel comfortable knowing that when you get the right team, you get all your questions answered. There's over 120 episodes right now in the episode guide. So if you want to hear more of these real life firsthand accounts of how real renters turned into first-time home buyers, check out the episode guide in the show notes. Thanks again for listening today. And don't forget, you can do this.
Looking for more DIY education or your own personal step-by-step guidance through the home buying journey? Since 2019, How to Buy a Home has been the #1 resource for first-time home buyers. So visit howtobuyaHome.com to get started.